Hello, welcome to the Humanitarian Voices, a monthly podcast from Human Angle. I'm Ahmed Salkida, your host. Humanitarian Voices is a brand new podcast from Human Angle in collaboration with humanitarian organizations. Here we discuss and spotlight the different forms of humanitarian crisis across Africa and what it means for the livelihood and quality of life of those affected. We partner with and speak to humanitarian organizations for deeper understanding. We have partnered with the International Committee of the Red Cross, and for this very first episode, we have them here in the studio. Patience Nanklin Yusuf is here with me. Patience has worked with the ICRC for over a decade in both field and the delegation.
Thank you, Ahmed, for having me. The International Committee of the Red Cross, which is also known as ICRC, and in most places they also call us the Red Cross, is an international humanitarian organization whose work is to protect and assist victims of armed conflicts and violence in order to ensure that their rights are protected and the rules that guide and protect them are respected by all parties to the conflict. In these areas, we work in an impartial way, in a neutral way, in an independent manner to be able to ensure that we are able to give them this needed support that they have based on our mandate. In Nigeria, the ICRC has been working since the Civil War. That's the Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970 and consistently from 1988. However, this organization is 160 years old and birthed in the battlefield. That's why our mandate covers armed conflict and violence. It's a strict mandate which we strictly adhere to. In Nigeria, we work in the northeast, the north central, and the south areas of the country where there has been issues of the non-international armed conflict in the northeast and other situations of violence in other areas of the country, where these places have huge humanitarian consequences as well as huge humanitarian needs. But in all these areas, we don't work alone. We work strictly with closely with our partners, which is the Nigerian Red Cross Society. They have branches everywhere in the country, in all 36 states and the FCT, as well as a volunteer strength of over 350 registered volunteers all over the country. And with these partners, we're able to reach our mandate to be able to assist and protect people who are affected by armed conflict and violence, as well as other disasters, depending on the area where this is happening.
Thank you for sharing the important work ICRC is doing. We will come back to ICRC later. But first of all, I would like to know, how do people become vulnerable?
Anybody can be vulnerable. Not necessarily because there's an armed conflict or there's violence, but the loss of a livelihood creates vulnerability. Accidents or ill health could create a vulnerability. People get vulnerable as a result of age, disability, it could be status, natural or man-made disasters, but then anybody could be vulnerable, and as such, people need protection. Especially certain people have special needs during vulnerability to be able to protect them and ensure that they are not exposed to dangers or taken advantage of due to their vulnerabilities.
Serving these people comes in different forms. The ICRC have served millions of people in the areas of sanitation, shelter, and hygiene. Which demographic have proven to be the most in need of these services?
So we have children. We also have women, particularly those who are heading households for whatever reasons, either because the breadwinner is not around, maybe a widow, or for various reasons they have become head of their households. In Nigeria, particularly in the northeast, due to the ongoing non-international armed conflicts in the northeast, a lot of people are affected. A lot of people are displaced. I think the figures are over 2.2 million. displaced, over 8 million in need of humanitarian assistance. That is a huge number. The ICRC reaches out to communities where it has access within these areas that fall within our mandates to be able to target and assist the most vulnerable. So for us, the criteria we use is humanity and impartiality. In areas where we are able to access, where we are able to work, this is quite key to targeting the most vulnerable. You have a lot of people, a whole village displaced, but the levels of vulnerability for each category of people within that community varies. So you have women, children, aged people, persons with disabilities having a more dire level of vulnerability than others. That doesn't mean everyone else is not in need, but then they are a special case that needs special support or special assistance. For the ICRC, most of our criteria looks at that to ensure that the most vulnerable get assisted. So we do what we call response based on needs. We look at the needs, the vulnerability, and respond to those first. In wherever area we work, be it shelter, provision, be it food, water, healthcare, the target is to those vulnerable, most vulnerable within these communities. And we work closely with these communities to be able to ascertain these vulnerabilities and then the associated needs.
Thank you. Human Angle has documented several cases, problems relating to food ration, food distributions, and in some cases where young women have to choose between their bodies and access to food. How has ICRC work ensures accountability in access to food or food distribution generally?
Yeah, as you would know, within areas of displacement particularly, one of the major needs is the food. And we have a lot of humanitarian organizations working in this area to be able to respond and give food rations to support those who are affected. Within the ICRC, we do work with, in cases where it allows direct food distribution to the affected communities or the affected persons, and in areas where the markets can contain it, we're able to give cash for food or food tokens or tickets where they are able to access, either to exchange the tickets for the food with selected vendors or be able to have cash to access the type of food they want or make the choice. Yeah, we do have people who are in dire situations. With conflict comes a lot of vulnerabilities, including people being exposed to sexual abuse, sexual violence, which takes many forms, including coping mechanisms where you see exchange of sexual services for survival. So it's survival sex. And then with regards to this kind of cases, the ICRC is aware of that happening. And we already have measures that we take to be able to tackle this. Apart from ensuring through different ways that there's prevention of sexual exploitation of violence. So looking at the internally, from internal to the external partners that we work with to ensure that there's full respect for the dignity of persons who are affected. They are aware of ways to be able to report these kind of things and then to raise this within our contracts, within our engagement with our consultants, with our partners, with community members to ensure that cases of sexual exploitation and violence do not arise. Where they arise, they are tackled because the ICRC has zero tolerance for this. They are tackled and addressed and followed up to the last point. But then most importantly is the survivor. What happens to them? We're able to, through different programs, be able to address these issues to ensure that they have response, they have survivor assistance within the 72 hours of the attack, and then to follow up with the authorities within the different areas to be able to ensure that this doesn't happen or is mitigated as much as possible. So we do what we call dialogue with the authorities. Depending on who it is in charge of whatever form or the whatever camp or situation that the people are living in, to ensure that there are actions taken to reduce that and reduce their exposure to this kind of danger, and then to also work with the affected community to see where they themselves can undertake programs and actions that would help increase their protection and their resilience to this kind of attacks or vulnerability that happens.
Thank you.
It's not the most discussed topic in
Yes.
Nigeria here.
Yes. So still on minority groups, what would you say about people that are living with disabilities? How have they been faring in conflict situations?
Well, vulnerabilities come in different ways. So you find whole communities displaced, sometimes once, sometimes several times over. And then there is already that vulnerability that comes from being uprooted from your place of your abode, your village, where you know, and then being moved to a different setup, having lost livelihood, probably having health issues, exposure to whatever it is that is going to come to you, not being in your own area. Okay. But then in addition to that, persons with disabilities have additional vulnerabilities, because within our society, there's already that limitation they face in engaging adequately in society on an equal platform due to disabilities. Then having conflict or violence or disaster on top of that put an added layer of vulnerability when it comes to especially access to socio-economic services. So for persons with disability, we already know that the World Health Organization figures puts it at 15% of any population, of the world population, having disabilities. So imagine that in any community you work with or any affected community you're engaging with, at least 15% would have disabilities. So for the ICRC, what we look out is to ensure that we engage more and ensure that persons with disabilities are included. So we look at it from the point of inclusion, that they're included, they participate effectively with every other person without disability on equal level. Their opinions, their preferences are taken into consideration. Their challenges are factored in designing whatever response, so that the response is able to adapt and target and provide that they are able to engage with us and access these services as well as persons without disabilities. It's work in progress. We're not at the peak, but then it's what we are looking at, to be able to ensure that they engage as well as every other person who does not have disabilities. And for persons with disabilities, it's not just persons with physical disabilities, because we notice that's what most people look at. We look at physical disabilities, linked to mobility and sensory. But then we need to go further and look at persons with intellectual disabilities, psychosocial disabilities, and see what else we can do to ensure that they're able to engage and access these resources and these assistance as well as everyone else. And this takes many different phases. For the ICRC, we have a key program that targets physical disability. We call it the Physical Rehabilitation Program, where we work with persons who have been affected by conflict and violence, particularly with loss of limbs. So we work with the center in Maiduguri and another one in Kano to be able to give services. There's the physiotherapy. There's prosthetics, giving people prosthetics, changing it, and then even going further than that, giving them mental and psychosocial support, as well as, where possible, giving them access to microeconomic initiatives to help them restart their lives. So what we're looking at in our programs is not just giving assistance for today, but looking at how we can ensure we build resilience and able to provide sustainable and durable solutions.
Wow. No doubt, ICRC is doing important life-saving work. Even as reporters, it is very difficult working in displacement camps. How has ICRC fared in the areas it has presence?
The ICRC in Nigeria, as well as in the over 100 countries it works with our four fundamental principles: the neutrality, independence, and impartiality. For us, it means wherever we work, we're not influenced by political, religious actors or concerns that are happening within that area. We're strictly neutral parties who are there for the sole purpose of accessing, assisting, and protecting those who are affected. So for that, it ensures that it insists that we don't side any parties to whatever conflict or violence that is taking place, But then going further than that, we find that we need to discuss or dialogue with all the parties to the conflict to ensure that they understand our mandate, they are able to guarantee our security, to be able to access people who are affected, to provide the assistance. So in that sense, it means we talk to everyone where we can. We are able to dialogue with them to understand what is happening, particularly to be able to access those who are affected, because that is our sole aim, to be able to provide the needed assistance in areas where most times everything has run down or everything is broken down and people are not able to access the services they need for survival. And then for impartiality, I mentioned earlier, we look at the needs on ground. So what I keep telling people is impartiality does not mean 50-50. It doesn't mean equal. It means looking at the needs on ground and responding to those needs based on the vulnerabilities. So there's something I ask when I go to the field and we're engaging with people. So I ask them, you have people living, or everybody displaced from a community. Some are living in the host community. Some have maybe families within the capital. We have people that are in the school, some living under the tree in the school because the space in the classroom is not enough. We have people that are pregnant, old, children, youth. If they have 10 blankets or 100 blankets, who would they prefer for it to be given? And I ask them to rank it according to priority. So once they do that, I explain to them that is how we assist. So you don't feel you have been sidelined because you are not my language, or because we don't have the same religion, or I like this one better than the other one. It's looking at the needs of pregnant women and small children will be priority over the needs of adults or other adults or youths. Not because they don't need it, but if we have limited resources, we need to follow priorities and vulnerabilities, and that's how we work generally.
Interesting to hear about ICRC's distributive justice. Accountability is something that is central to our work here in Human Angle, and I understand that you head the accountability section in ICRC. What is it all about, and what do you do?
So the ICRC is quite key on accountability to affected persons. For the accountability to affected persons units, we work to support all of operations to ensure that we keep doing what we're doing. We work to assist people who are affected. So the idea is to ensure that our programs remain people-centric. So for that, what the ICRC does is to ensure that how we've been doing it over the years is good, but how can we make what we're doing better? How can we increasingly improve our accountability by putting the people at center, by engaging with them? Do we look at how we can include them in designing our programs to be part of it from the inception to the execution? Do we listen to them to ensure that we hear from them, and then our programs are designed based on the feedback they give us, based on their preference, based on their choices? Are we open to them to tell them what we can or cannot do? We have limitations of budget sometimes, we have limitations of access to some areas. Are they aware? Are we open to develop that relationship that they can trust us to understand when we can't do something? And then do we provide outlets for them or platforms that they can engage, they can ask us questions, they can challenge us on what we do? So that's what the accountability is. Ensuring that we're coming from a place where they have a seat on the table. They are co-designers of the response that is undertaken on their behalf. They're able to question it, they're able to say it doesn't work for us, we would prefer something else. And we're able to take that criticism or that feedback and adapt. And the idea is not to automatically change everything because someone says, I don't want it. So the idea is we are partners in this. We're not coming from a position of power and then someone is a victim or a beneficiary receiving it, but we are partners in looking out for durable solutions, sustainable solutions, that they're able to protect their dignity within that and ensure that they are not at the end of the day dependent on us, but that they can, after a while, work on their own to be able to develop resilience to engage and sustain their livelihoods.
So Patience, what really stood out for you working in ICRC over the decade?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I've had, within my 10 years in the ICRC, worked in the field and in the delegation here in Abuja and in the field where we have operations. And I would say I've actually enjoyed the time in the field. It's quite stressful, it's tiring, it's demanding. But then the smile you see on people's faces at the end of the day, knowing that at least today I'm going to sleep with food in my stomach because of that effort, is worth the tiredness. I remember vividly, this doesn't leave my mind. I joined Water and Habitat team for shelter distribution. So they had distributed roofing kits, shelter, roofing kits, nails, and everything that is needed to build a house. And I was trying to take a picture of a lady and her. I found out later it was she and her granddaughter. And I happened to hear the girl ask her daughter in Hausa. I don't know if I can speak Hausa. Yeah. And she says, "Mama, zamu koma gida." And it just, there was this smile, there was this hope and smile on her face when she said that. And I asked the mother earlier, and I found out it was her grandmother. I was like, why did she say that? She said they had been displaced for over 3 years. They had moved, everything had been burnt, had been destroyed, and they have been squatting in the community. So seeing these items kind of gave the girl hope. Are we going to go back to our house? And then there was this smile on her face. And when I remember that smile, I remember it was a tiring experience in the field, but it was worth it to just see that smile and hear that question. But unfortunately, there are many more who wouldn't get that chance because the resources are not much. The needs are much, resources are limited.
Nylons to cover up.
Yes, there are indeed emotional moments when dealing with people that are displaced. We also have our moments too that remains dear and most memorable to us.
So I'm curious to know, why did Human Angle decide to focus on humanitarian issues, humanitarian concerns?
Well, I think for me, I have worked as a journalist in the past 23 years, and I come from the Northeast, and where I think the Northeast recorded Nigeria's biggest conflict with one of the largest displacements. So it was home, and I've had personal experiences where I've either had a neighbor or a relative or a friend who was directly or indirectly affected by this conflict. And as a journalist, I noticed this is one area that is missing, and the need to have a publication that specializes on the single biggest problem in Nigeria. It's non-negotiable, and Human Angle came on board to fill in this void, very large gap. And that's why over the years we have devoted everything, resources, our time, our energy, our knowledge, in covering issues around conflict, humanitarian and development issues in Africa.
Thank you.
You.